This is going to be a haunted house story. It's a story that comes from the little town where I lived when I was growing up. Very small town. When I graduated from high school, there were 32 kids in the whole senior class. I'm talking about a very small town. And in little towns, back in those days when I was a kid, there wouldn't be very many stores. Along the main street of town, there were about 5 stores and a post office. One of the stores belonged to a man named Mr. Cole, C-O-L-E, like old King Cole. And he thought he was clever. He called his store the Cole Cash Store. You know, there's that expression, cold cash, money right there on the spot. Well, his name wasn't Cold, it was Cole, but he thought that was clever. He called the store the Cole Cash Store, and we all called the man by the name of the store. We called him Cole Cash, and we stayed away from that store. His store was dirty. One of my friends went in there one time and bought a candy bar. When he unwrapped it, there was a worm in the candy bar. He brought it to school and showed it to everybody. I saw it. It was a fat white worm coiled up in the brown chocolate. We stayed away from that store. But we knew that man was not making money from the store. He made money by renting old houses. Most of them were north of the railroad tracks. They called that part of town across the tracks, or some people called it más allá del tren. And nobody would live over there, más allá del tren, unless they were so poor they couldn't afford to live anyplace else. He was a sharp operator. He made a lot of money renting those old houses across the tracks. But he made a big mistake on one house he bought. No one had lived in that old house for a long time. If you would ask anybody in the neighborhood why that house was always empty, they'd say something like this: Es una casa donde penan. Hay un ánima que anda penando en esa casa. Es una casa embrujada. That's a haunted house, they would say. There is a soul suffering in that old house. But the man from the store must not have heard about that. Or maybe he didn't believe in such things. He went right ahead and bought the house. All he did was to slap a coat of paint on the outside of the house, and then he tried to rent it to some family. Nobody would take that house. They said, I don't want to live in that house if he gives it to me for free. Ni nada, quiero vivir en esa casa. And that is exactly the offer he started to make. He put out the word all around town. If a family would move into that house, and if they would sign a paper promising to stay in the house for a whole year, he would let them stay for the first 6 months for free. They wouldn't have to pay anything. He figured that as soon as a family was living in the old house, all of the talk in the neighborhood about ánimas, espíritus, souls and spirits, it would just go away. But still, nobody would take that house. They said they didn't even want it for free, and they meant it. But then a man came to town. He was the uncle of one of my friends. The man's name was Frank Padilla. My friend's name was Chino. Well, that wasn't his real name. His real name was Refugio. Pero Refugio tenía pelo chino. Pelo chino means curly hair. His hair was so curly, even his mom and dad called him Chino. And Chino told me that his Uncle Frank had had a lot of bad luck in his life. He had a good job in a mine in one of the towns up north. But one day he came home from work and his wife was gone. She wasn't just gone from the house, she was gone. He had to start raising his two daughters all by himself. And then Frank got sick and he lost his job in the mine. So he came to our little town because he wanted to start life all over again. When Frank and his daughter first got to town, they lived with my friend and their family. But Frank got busy right away looking for a job and for a house he could afford to rent. Chino's dad told him about the offer the man was making at the store. And Frank said, 6 months for free? That's rent I can afford to pay. He went down to the store and he came back saying he was going to move into that old house. Everybody tried to talk him out of it, especially my friend's mom. She was Frank's sister. And also my friend's grandma. She lived there with the family. Frank told them, oh, that's just a lot of nonsense. He said, son puras habladas, son cuentos de comadres. That's just a lot of old wives' tales, he said. He said he was going to move into that house. But then Frank began to notice his daughters were not too happy about the idea of moving into a house that everyone said was haunted. So he told the girls he would stay in the house by himself for a while. He would prove there was nothing wrong, and then they could join him. He moved a bed into the house. He stayed there for 1 week. He didn't tell anybody about it at the time. But later on, when he got a job with the highway department, he admitted to some of the men on his crew, even that first week, strange things happened in that house. For example, once in the middle of the night, a cold wind came rushing through the room and it blew the blanket right off his bed. He woke up feeling cold and he found the blanket in a pile on the floor, 6 or 8 feet below the foot of the bed. And then another time, when he woke up in the morning, one of his shoes was in a different room. He had put both of his shoes right under the edge of the bed when he took them off to go to sleep. And then there was another time when the light turned on in the room all by itself in the middle of the night. But Frank really wanted to take advantage of that offer of 6 months for free. He kind of explained those things away in his mind. He told everybody, there's nothing wrong with that house. And after 1 week had gone by, he wanted his older daughter to start staying there too. Her name was Elena. She was 14 years old. Ooh, my friend's mom hit the ceiling. She told her brother, no, it's way too soon. You've barely lived in that house. And my friend's grandma didn't like the idea one little bit, but she didn't say anything. She could tell her son had already made up his mind. That grandma was a wise woman. She had lived most of her life in Mexico. She knew all about ánimas, fantasmas, espíritus, brujería. She knew about all of those scary things, souls and spirits and ghosts and witchcraft. She once told us that 9 times out of 10, a ghost will appear to a girl between the age of 11 and 17. So she talked to her granddaughter. She told her that if she did see something in that house, she would be the only one who could see it, because a ghost only appears to one person at a time. And the ghost wouldn't be able to talk to her until she talked to it first. And you have to say the right thing. It's in Spanish. You have to say, en nombre de Dios. ¿Eres de este mundo o del otro? In God's name, are you of this world or the other one? If it answers the other world, then you have to say, en nombre de Dios. ¿Qué es lo que quieres? In God's name, what do you want? Because a ghost comes around because it wants something. And she told Elena, if the ghost said what it wanted, even if she was willing to do it and able to do it before she did it, she must make the ghost say that once it had been done, it would not come back again. Well, that night, Elena had her mind made up. She was not going to sleep. She lay in the bed with her eyes wide open, listening for every sound. But it got later and later. Her eyelids began to feel so heavy. She was just about to drift away to sleep. But then she opened her eyes because she began to hear a noise up on the roof of the house. It was a pounding sound, like somebody was up there driving nails with a hammer. And then there was a shuffling sound going across the roof of the house. And then she heard a loud thump. And then heavy footsteps went running across the roof. And then she heard a long, loud scream. She screamed too when she heard the scream outside. She jumped up in the bed. Her father came running into the room. He said to her, "What happened? Why did you scream?" She told her father, "Well, there was all that noise up on the roof, and then that person screamed outside." Her father said, "There was no noise on the roof. I was wide awake. I would have heard it. And nobody screamed but you." She insisted that she had heard it. Her father said, "You were dreaming." She swore that she had been awake, but her father didn't believe her. He sat down on the edge of the bed. He put his arm around her shoulder. He thought, pretty soon she'll calm back down. And in a little while, she was calm enough so she could lie back down in the bed. She put her head on the pillow. She kind of rolled her face to one side. And then her father saw her eyes open wide. She could see something coming in through the window of the room. It was at the bottom of the window. The boards were warped. There was a narrow crack, and it looked like a white mist that was filtering in through that crack. When it was inside, it began to take shape until it looked like a girl about the same age as her, wearing a long, fancy white dress. Elena thought the other girl was trying to talk to her. She remembered what her grandma had told her. Elena tried to speak, but all that came out of her mouth sounded like this. And then she fainted. Her father saw her eyes close and her mouth close. He saw her body get all limp. He was so scared that he reached down and grabbed her and he pulled her up beside him. That sudden jerk, when her father pulled her upright, startled Elena. She came out of the faint. She opened her eyes, and she could see the shape clearly. It was a girl. She was wearing a long white dress, like a dress for a high school prom back in those days. But much more, it looked like she was dressed for a quinceañera, a big birthday celebration for a girl when she turns 15. Elena looked at the other girl's face. She could see features on her face, like a nose and lips and skin and all, but she could see the teeth and the bones behind them. She looked at her eyes, but instead of seeing eyes, she saw a blue glow way back in her head. And she saw that her mouth kept opening and closing, like she was trying to speak. Because Elena felt her father's arm around her shoulder, she was braver. She took a deep breath. She swallowed hard. She said, "En nombre de Dios, ¿eres de este mundo o del otro?" When the ghost girl answered her, it was like the wind was blowing through her voice. She said, "Otro." So Elena knew she was talking to a ghost because she said otro, the other one, the other world. And Elena said to her, "En nombre de Dios, ¿qué es lo que quieres?" The ghost girl told her, "Quiero que me ayudes." "I want you to help me," she said. "Quiero que me ayudes." And Elena said she would help her. The ghost girl came on across the room. She came right up next to her. She got so close to her that Elena could feel her breath blowing against her face. It was icy cold, and it smelled. It smelled damp and musty like the earth smells. And then the ghost girl went on and told her that for 1 whole year she had been stealing money from her parents. She was going to use the money to buy herself a dress for her fiesta de 15 años. Her family was very poor. They told her there was no way they could afford to buy her a dress to celebrate her 15th birthday. So she started stealing from them. And she hid the money in a metal box that she buried in the vacant lot next door. But 1 week before her 15th birthday, her father was mending the roof of the house. He was running out of nails. So he shouted down through one of the vent pipes in the roof and told his daughter to bring him more nails. She got the nails and she climbed up the ladder to the roof. She almost got to where her father was working, over by the edge of the roof. But then she tripped. She tripped over a loose shingle and she fell. Her father came running across the roof to catch her. He was too late. She fell off the roof. She landed on her head. Her neck was broken, and she was killed. She begged Elena to find the box where she had buried it under the tree in the lot next door. and she told her what to do with the money in the box. She told her not to keep any money for herself, because stolen money will bring you no good. Dinero robado es dinero embrujado. Stolen money has a curse on it. She told her to use some of the money to pay for rosaries, to be prayed for her and also for her father and mother, because they were dead by this time too. And then she told her to talk to the priest at the church and to find out the name of the last baby girl who had been baptized at the church. But it had to be a baby girl who had been born más allá del tren, across the tracks. She should go to the First National Bank and open up a bank account in that baby's name, but with a strict condition that nothing could be taken out of that bank account until 1 week before the baby would turn 15. And then the money had to be used to buy her a dress for her quinceañera. Elena swore she would do all of those things, but she said to the ghost girl, y entonces, ¿tú no vas a volver? And then you're not going to come back again? And the ghost girl told her, no, nunca. Never, she said. And then she faded away, and she was gone. Elena talked to her father about what had happened, but he hadn't seen or heard anybody. He didn't believe it. But then he said to himself, I really could use some money. So the next morning he went with his daughter to the vacant lot next door. There was a big salt cedar tree in that lot, and underneath that tree they saw a flat, smooth stone. That looked like the logical place to dig. They set the rock aside, they dug down, and they found a metal box. It was an old jewelry box. It had flower decorations stamped into the metal on the top, and on the front there was a button you push to one side to release the latch. They cleaned the dirt away from that button. They popped the latch. They opened the jewelry box. It was full of fine gray ashes. Frank was disgusted. He slammed the lid back down on the box and threw it back into the hole. He said, "Oh, I'm going to go and get some breakfast." And he went off to my friend's house. Elena followed her father, but she took enough time to put dirt back on top of the box. She set the rock back in place. And then the next night, the ghost girl appeared to her again. In the same way, it was like a white mist that filtered in at the bottom of the window, and then it took shape. But this time when the ghost took shape, she was much uglier, much more startling. Her head was twisted around at a crazy angle, like her neck was broken, and the flesh just seemed to be dripping away from the bones of her face. And she waved a finger at Elena, as if to tell her she hadn't done the right thing. And then she faded away. She was gone. Elena jumped out of bed. She didn't even wake up her father. She ran to my friend's house. And when her father came looking for her in the morning, that girl had a fever of 103 degrees. She was deathly sick. She stayed like that for 4 days. Her father didn't know what to do, but her grandma did. Her grandma put a chair beside the bed, and sat there listening, even when it seemed like Elena was delirious and talking out of her mind. And the grandma figured out the whole story. Every time she would tell us about it, she would explain the reason there had been nothing but ashes in the metal box was that Elena's father did not believe what she had experienced, and he had no business going there with her. And even worse, his intentions for the money in the box were not right. On the fourth night of Elena's fever, when the rest of the family was asleep, her grandma woke her up. She wrapped her in a blanket because the girl was still trembling with fever. Her grandma helped her. They walked down through the empty streets. They went back to the vacant lot. They set the rock aside again, and they dug down in the soft dirt. They got out the old jewelry box. This time, when they popped the latch and they lifted the lid on that jewelry box, it was full of money. A whole bunch of crumpled up dollar bills, and then a big pile of quarters and nickels and dimes and pennies. They carried the box with the money in it back home. And the first thing the next morning, the grandma went to the church. She arranged for those prayers to be prayed for the dead girl and for the dead girl's father and mother. And when she got back to the house, already Elena's fever was gone. By noontime that day, she was strong enough to go with her grandma back to the church. They talked to the priest. They found out the name of that baby. They went down to the First National Bank and they made all of those arrangements. And by the end of that day, Elena was as healthy as ever. By the end of that week, my friend's Uncle Frank and his two daughters moved into that old house. They lived in that old house for 1 whole year. They were never bothered by any more ghosts. And for the first 6 months they were living in that house, they weren't bothered by that stingy man, Cold Cash, coming around to collect a penny of rent from them. My friend's grandma kept the metal box. She would not take it out if her son was around. He still didn't want to hear any talk about ghosts or haunted houses. He told his daughters they were forbidden to say anything about it. But sometimes, if my friend and I knew his grandma was in the house by herself, we'd get some other kid and bring him to the house to hear the story because we wanted to hear it again too. She would get out the box, she'd show it to us, and then she'd start to tell us the story, the whole story about how her granddaughter had seen that ghost in Cold Cash's haunted house. But you know, when we were in the 8th grade, my friend's grandma died. And then there was nobody to tell us the story. Well, we tried telling it to each other, but we couldn't do it the way she would. And then the doubts began to creep into our minds. We thought, oh, maybe she made it up anyway. By the time I was about a junior in high school, I had my mind made up that story could not have been true. But when I was a junior in high school, something changed my mind. Our English teacher, Mrs. Hughes, she decided to teach us all about newspapers. She taught us how to interview people, how to ask them good questions, and then write a good newspaper story from it. She told us everything about newspapers. She told us that a newspaper will save 1 copy of every single paper that comes out. You can go to any newspaper office. You can look at old editions of that newspaper as far back as it's been in print. And she gave me an assignment. She told me to go to the newspaper office in our little town, look at old papers, and find a good story to report to the class about. Well, remember I told you it was a small town. The newspaper came out only once a week. There wouldn't be huge quantities of newspapers. And I knew the man who ran the newspaper. His name was Sam Player. I went down to the newspaper office. He took me into a room where there were shelves all stacked up with old newspapers. He went off to do his work, and I started shuffling through those old papers. I couldn't find a good story. Well, I did find a story about the explosion at the powder company. In our town, they manufactured dynamite for the copper mines. But we all went to school with kids whose dads had been killed in that explosion. We knew a lot about it already. And then I found a story about the passenger train that jumped off the tracks right outside our town. People in my town took the passengers into their homes, just like family, till they got the track fixed and they could go on their way. But all of the grown-ups in town liked to talk about that, so we knew all about it. But then my eye fell on a headline. This is what it said: "Girl dies in tragic fall." Underneath the headline, there was a subtitle, and the subtitle said, "Parents had birthday celebration planned." I read that story. It told about a girl named Mariana Mendoza who had fallen from the roof of a house 1 week before her 15th birthday. And of course, her parents were heartbroken. Their daughter had been killed. But the story explained that these parents were especially devastated because for 1 whole year they had secretly been saving money to buy their daughter a dress for her fiesta de 15 años. The day before the accident happened, they had gone to Tucson and they had purchased the dress. And then all they could do was bury their daughter in the dress they had been sacrificing for 1 whole year to buy her to celebrate her 15th birthday. I didn't make a report on that story. I sat there and I copied every single word of that story. I went back to the high school and I read the story to my junior English class. You should have seen the looks on the kids' faces in my class, because everyone was more or less familiar with that situation. When I got to the end of the story, I put the paper down and I told the kids in my English class, I just want to say one thing. I hope that girl's parents never found out she had been stealing money from them that same year. Every kid in the class nodded in agreement with me. The English teacher, Mrs. Hughes, she said, I didn't catch that part of the story. But I figured, she's probably one of these people who don't believe in ghosts. I said, it's just something the kids talk about. And I let it go at that. But you know what I was talking about, don't you? Wouldn't you agree with me?